When the song Take Me Home, Country Roads first played on the radio, it introduced music fans to the warm and unforgettable voice of John Denver. Over the next 20 years, he became one of the most beloved acoustic performers of the 1970s and one of the best-selling artists of the time. He was not only a gifted singer, songwriter, and actor but also seen as a wholesome, inspiring public figure. To many, he was the picture of kindness and sincerity. But behind the public image, John Denver's personal life told a very different story, one that shocked even his most devoted fans. Accounts from ex-wives and documented reports of his troubling behavior revealed that the man they admired wasn't exactly the man they thought they knew. Over time, the truth about Denver's struggles and flaws began to surface, and it was far more unsettling than anyone had imagined. John Denver was born Henry John Deutschendorf on December 31, 1943, in Roswell, New Mexico. At first glance, his childhood seemed like a dream. His father, Captain Henry Deutschendorf Sr., was a celebrated U.S. Air Force pilot who set 3 speed records in a B-58 Hustler bomber and earned a place in the Air Force Hall of Fame. Denver grew up surrounded by the pride and prestige of his father's achievements, but life in a military family came with its own challenges. The constant relocations, moving from Arizona to Alabama, then to Texas and many other places, meant that young John rarely had the chance to put down roots or form lasting friendships. Just when he would start to settle into a new place, the family would have to move again. This left him feeling isolated and out of place, a sense of displacement that stayed with him well into adulthood. When Denver was 11 years old and living in Tucson, Arizona, his grandmother gave him a gift that would change his life, a vintage Gibson guitar made in 1910. By the time it reached him, the guitar was already more than 40 years old, worn but full of history. It quickly became his most treasured possession, a constant in a life full of change. Through that guitar, he found comfort and self-expression, using music to fill the empty spaces left by loneliness. Over time, those quiet moments spent playing would become the foundation for a career that touched millions. John Denver's love for music kept growing as he got older. He soon joined the Tucson, Arizona Boys Chorus, where he learned how to sing in harmony and perform in front of audiences. By the time he reached high school, he was already playing folk songs at small local shows. Music was no longer just something he enjoyed in private, it was becoming his way of finding stability in a life that was always changing. His relationship with his father, nicknamed Dutch, was often complicated. Dutch was a strict man who pushed his son to excel at everything, but Denver was more of a gentle soul who simply wanted to write and perform songs. Even though they clashed at times, the two shared one strong passion: flying. When Denver learned how to fly, it gave them common ground and brought them closer together. It was an activity that carried a sense of freedom and risk, a risk that would sadly play a tragic role later in Denver's life. The feeling of soaring through the air would stay with him forever, inspiring many of the songs he would later write. After graduating high school, Denver attended Texas Tech University to study architecture. But he quickly realized that designing buildings wasn't his dream, writing and performing music was. He dropped out and moved to Los Angeles, determined to follow his passion. Around that time, he changed his last name from Deutschendorf to Denver, inspired by Colorado's mountains and rivers. To him, the name felt like a fresh start and perfectly matched the natural beauty he often sang about. In the mid-1960s, Denver's big break arrived. Out of about 200 hopefuls, he was chosen to be the lead singer of the Chad Mitchell Trio, a well-known folk group. This was his first serious step into the music industry, and it gave him the chance to tour across the country, perform for large audiences, and grow as a performer. He stayed with the group for 2 years and recorded 3 albums with them. During this time, Denver wrote one of his earliest hits, Leaving on a Jet Plane. The song was recorded by the famous folk trio Peter, Paul, and Mary, and it went on to become a #1 hit on the Billboard charts in the late 1960s. Even though Denver wasn't yet a household name, the success of that song proved that he had the talent to write music that deeply connected with people. When the Chad Mitchell Trio eventually split up, Denver didn't slow down. He focused on his solo career, And while the transition from group singer to solo artist was challenging, he handled it with determination. His career truly took off in the early 1970s with the release of his breakthrough album, Poems, Prayers, and Promises. One of the songs from the album, Take Me Home, Country Roads, became a classic, but it almost never made it. Early copies had sound problems, and at first it looked like the song might fail. But Denver's new manager, Jerry Weintraub, believed in it. He pushed radio stations in Denver, Colorado to play it. Released in mid-April, the song slowly gained popularity, and by late August, it had climbed to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. It sold over 1 million copies, earning gold certification that same month. Over the years, it remained one of Denver's most famous songs, selling more than 1.5 million digital copies in the United States alone. Its impact was so lasting that West Virginia officially named it one of the state's songs. In 1972, Denver followed up with Rocky Mountain High, released in September. It was his 6th album and his first to reach the top 10 in the United States, peaking at number 4 on the Billboard 200. The title track, inspired by the beauty of Colorado, became one of his most loved songs, reaching the Billboard Hot 100's top 10 in 1973 and ranking number 29 on the year-end chart. Fans who loved nature connected deeply with it. The album cover, photographed at Slaughterhouse Falls in Aspen, Colorado, made the song even more personal. Years later, Rocky Mountain High would be honored as one of Colorado's 2 official state songs. By the mid-1970s, John Denver was at the absolute height of his fame. In just an 18-month span from 1974 to 1975, he achieved what few artists ever have: 4 number-1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100. Sunshine on My Shoulders reached the top in March 1974, followed by Annie's Song in July, Thank God I'm a Country Boy in May 1975, and I'm Sorry in September 1975. These hits showed the range of his artistry. Gentle, heartfelt ballads alongside upbeat, joy-filled country tunes. Annie's Song, famously written in just 10 minutes for his wife, became a wedding favorite for generations. During this golden era, Denver also released 3 back-to-back albums that all went to number 1. His Greatest Hits, 1973, became RCA Records' best-selling album ever, even surpassing Elvis Presley's sales. Back Home Again, 1974, went triple platinum, and Windsong, 1975, went double platinum. By the time his career ended, Denver had released roughly 300 songs, writing about 200 himself, earned 12 gold albums for platinum albums, and sold more than 33 million records worldwide, making him one of the most successful singer-songwriters of the 1970s. Denver's charm carried him beyond music. In 1977, he made his acting debut alongside comedy legend George Burns in the hit film Oh God. Despite having no acting background, his sincerity and warmth made his performance believable and engaging. The film, directed by Carl Reiner and based on Avery Corman's novel, was a box office success, earning over $51 million in the US and even an Oscar nomination for Best Screenplay. While Denver didn't appear in the sequels, the role proved he could cross over into Hollywood successfully. His manager, Jerry Weintraub, also helped him break into the international market, particularly in the UK, where some critics doubted Denver's appeal. Weintraub sidestepped the press entirely and arranged a series of British TV specials that let audiences experience Denver's music directly. The strategy worked. His warm demeanor and crystal-clear vocals won over viewers, leading to a strong European fan base. One of these specials, An Evening with John Denver, even won a Primetime Emmy Award. Over the years, he hosted numerous specials featuring music, storytelling, and guest performances, which helped him remain one of the most beloved entertainers of the era. Denver also made his mark as an advocate. In the mid-1980s, when the U.S. Senate held hearings about putting warning labels on explicit music, Denver, known for his wholesome songs, surprised many by opposing censorship. He recounted how his song Rocky Mountain High had once been banned under the false belief it promoted drug use. His defense of free expression became a significant moment in the ongoing debate over music and speech rights. In 1985, He broke new ground by becoming the first American artist in over a decade to tour the Soviet Union during the Cold War, performing in 11 cities including Moscow, Leningrad, and Tallinn. His concerts transcended language barriers, connecting with audiences through themes of peace and humanity. Inspired by the trip, he wrote Let Us Begin, a plea for peace over conflict. Recordings from the tour became the album Live in the USSR. Denver returned to the Soviet Union in the late 1980s after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, performing at a benefit concert in Moscow to raise funds for victims. Proceeds from the event and recordings brought in substantial aid. For Denver, the night wasn't about politics, it was about compassion. His music made the audience feel heard, proving that even a single voice with a guitar could bridge divides and bring hope. In the early 1990s, John Denver brought his music to China, a country that had only recently begun opening its doors to the outside world. People there were already curious about him, and songs like Take Me Home, Country Roads were being taught and sung in schools. The Chinese government invited him to tour several cities, and one of his concerts was broadcast to more than 2 billion viewers. There had even been discussions about holding performances at historic landmarks such as the Forbidden City or the Temple of Heaven. Young people in China embraced him warmly, and even the country's leader had reportedly taken notice of Denver years earlier. The tour made him one of the most popular Western musicians in China at the time. Later in his life, Denver focused heavily on charity and humanitarian work. In the 1990s, he released a greatest hits album called Homegrown, donating all proceeds to help the homeless. Around the same period, he co-founded the World Hunger Project, which earned him the Presidential World Without Hunger Award. His passion for protecting the planet was just as strong. He created the WinStar Foundation and launched Plant 2000, a project dedicated to planting trees and restoring forests. By this point, giving back had become just as important to him as his music career. Despite his professional achievements, Denver's personal life was marked by turmoil and heartbreak. His first marriage to Annie Martel began as a fairy tale romance. They adopted 2 children together, and he famously wrote Annie's song for her in just 10 minutes. But as his fame grew, their relationship began to strain. Annie felt overshadowed and invisible, and by the early 1980s they divorced. The split was messy and painful. Privately, Denver's behavior could be volatile. In one infamous incident, after Annie cut down some of his favorite oak trees at their Aspen home, he retaliated by using a chainsaw to cut their furniture, and even their bed, in half. Friends and colleagues were stunned, as this side of Denver clashed sharply with his public image. Court records and accounts from those close to Annie described emotional abuse, and even some of Denver's former managers admitted he had a temper. Although Annie rarely spoke about it, the divorce tarnished his wholesome reputation. In the mid-1980s, Denver met Australian singer and actress Cassandra Delaney in a Sydney hotel bar where he was performing. Their relationship moved quickly, leading to a picturesque mountain wedding attended by close friends and family. But behind the scenes, the marriage was troubled from the start. Cassandra found the pressures of living with a world-famous musician difficult. Denver was older, his moods could shift suddenly, and his fame meant they were constantly in the public eye. In the late 1980s, they had a daughter, Jessie, whom Denver considered a miracle because he had believed since childhood that he couldn't have biological children. However, after Jessie's birth, Denver's behavior reportedly became more controlling, and Cassandra began to feel isolated. By the early 1990s, the relationship had broken down. Cassandra later gave a candid interview to an Australian magazine, describing Denver as a man without true friends, with staff who feared him and secretaries who often cried and quit. She claimed he drank heavily, yelled at her, and tried to control her life. They separated soon after, and the divorce turned into a bitter legal battle. Denver sued Cassandra for several $1 million, accusing her of damaging his public image, while she fought to retain custody of Jessie. Denver later admitted in his memoir that the split deeply wounded him. In the mid-1990s, he released his autobiography, Take Me Home, which shocked many fans. He wrote openly about using cannabis, LSD, and cocaine, and admitted to cheating on both of his wives, even during his first marriage, which had inspired Annie's song. He acknowledged acting violently at times, recounting again the chainsaw incident. The revelations shattered his carefully maintained clean-cut image. By then, Denver had already enjoyed one of the most successful runs of any American singer-songwriter in the 1970s. He had topped charts, sold millions of albums, and charmed audiences worldwide with his soft voice and acoustic style. RCA Records had released 25 of his albums, with 13 achieving gold status and 8 going platinum. His greatest hits collection became RCA's best-selling album of all time. But by the mid-1980s, the tide had started to turn. When music trends started changing in the 1980s, John Denver's soft, acoustic style no longer fit in with the popular sounds that used heavy synthesizers and drum machines. In 1986, RCA, the record label he had been with for many years, was sold to General Electric. The new management wanted to focus on newer artists and cut costs. Even though Denver had been one of their biggest successes, they decided to end his contract. Denver was shocked because he had just finished his next album, One World, and thought his contract renewal was certain. Instead, RCA moved on, thinking other artists would bring in more money. Denver felt they had taken him for granted despite all the profit he had brought them over the years. No other label was willing to sign him, so he had to release future albums through his own company, Windstar. It was a harsh reminder that even famous stars could be left behind when the music industry changes. Outside of music, Denver had another passion: flying. Over the years, he spent more than 20,000 hours in the air and earned licenses to fly single-engine and multi-engine planes, gliders, and even lighter-than-air aircraft. But in the 1990s, his personal problems started affecting his flying. He was arrested twice for driving under the influence. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, requires pilots to have a valid medical certificate to prove they are fit to fly, and after his second arrest, they refused to renew his certificate. Without it, his pilot's license was useless. To get it back, he would have had to prove he no longer had a drinking problem, but he never went through that process. Instead of complying with the FAA, Denver avoided their orders. When they sent him certified letters demanding he return his medical certificate, he either ignored them or sent them back unopened. This created a legal loophole. The FAA could not officially revoke his license because the process required his cooperation. On paper, he could still fly, but only because the system couldn't move forward without him signing for the notices. That loophole finally closed in March 1997, when Denver signed for one of the FAA's letters. This allowed them to officially ground him. From that point forward, every flight he took was illegal unless he met all requirements to get reinstated. Denver chose not to do that. On October 12, 1997, Denver took out a small experimental aircraft he had just bought. He was practicing takeoffs and landings near Monterey, California. He had owned the plane for only one day and had spent just about half an hour with an instructor before flying it alone. The plane had been heavily modified and was tricky to operate. One major issue was the fuel selector valve, which had been moved to a hard-to-reach spot behind the pilot's left shoulder. Switching fuel tanks required twisting in the seat and reaching back awkwardly, and the valve was so stiff it often needed pliers to turn. The fuel gauges were also behind the pilot, making them hard to read without a handheld mirror, and even then the readings were unclear. That morning while practicing, Denver used up the fuel in the left tank. Witnesses heard the engine sputter and stop. As the fuel ran out, he tried to switch to the right tank, but in the process of reaching back and using pliers, he accidentally pressed the right rudder pedal. This caused the plane's nose to dip sharply, and within seconds, it crashed into the Pacific Ocean. He was killed instantly. Investigators found that he had started the flight with too little fuel, about 3 gallons in one tank and 6 in the other, and that his lack of familiarity with the plane, along with its unsafe design changes, played a major role in the crash. They concluded the accident could have been avoided if he had refueled, received more training, or flown a safer aircraft. Denver's death was more than just a tragic accident. It highlighted a pattern of risky behavior. He often pushed limits, both in music and in flying. He was known to perform dangerous glider tricks, fly without proper medical approval, and ignore official warnings. Even though no drugs or alcohol were found in his system during the crash, his past DUI arrests and a previous accident while drinking had already hurt his reputation. Still, despite these flaws and controversies, his music and charitable work left a lasting impact, and millions continue to remember him for the songs that touched their hearts. John Denver's music still reaches people all over the world with its heartfelt messages about peace, love for the earth, and deep emotion. Songs like Take Me Home, Country Roads, Annie's Song, and Rocky Mountain High remain timeless favorites in folk and country music. He was also ahead of his time in using his fame to speak out for the environment, making it a central part of his work long before it became a popular cause. In the end, many remember John Denver not for the mistakes he made, but for his genuine love of nature and the powerful music he created. His legacy is captured beautifully in the 15-foot bronze statue displayed at Red Rocks Amphitheater, standing as a tribute to the man whose voice and songs will always travel those country roads in the hearts of his fans.